Emily, it was all about the kids. Let's start the game over. Back to the way things were. It's all about the kids. So put your family first. Let's start the game over.
Yes, good afternoon. Welcome to Put Your Family First podcast. We are in the building. So glad to be here on a great Monday on Cloud 57. Glad to be there. Goal accomplished. The video was out. Got to do my thing with one of the best, Dr. Kenneth Braswell, and he will be a host on Put Your Family First. We will be bringing him in. I'm glad to be here. Hello, Heather, Dr. Heather, and Dr. Dave.
Hey.
Yeah, how you guys doing today?
It's been a day. I'm so glad to be in it.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So today we're gonna get in to this conversation today. We wanted to talk about. Before we do, we want to remind you that this Saturday is the the 12th annual pancake breakfast. Interesting. Waiting on some feedback. I'm trying to bring some kids in to do some singing. I'm excited. Right, waiting to see if they can make it. We're also excited about, the opportunities, different people, and coming in from different areas to participate in the pancake breakfast. Shout out to Detroit Cots and Gerald Edwards and Bree in Detroit with Larry Charleston and Marlon. And Jackson. If I got that right, I think it's Marlon Jackson. Yeah. And again, bring your family out Saturday. Tickets on sale on Eventbrite for $20. It'll be $25 at the doors. All you can eat food is being catered by the Crab House.
Yes.
I took them boys to the Crab House today. Them boys fell in love. Right? And so just sharing with you about this pancake breakfast is big. We're going to make an announcement, a national announcement at the pancake breakfast on March 1st. We're going to ask you all to get involved, right? And there are some other things that we'll be talking about. The speakers are fire, starting with Cindy Eggleston, Cheryl Johnson, and Bert Johnson. And the conversation is going to be about us all coming together. What does it look like, right? Unity is love. And the work that they do and why it's so important that we move in this direction. We don't have to move into the direction of the terrorists, of the original terrorists and people who want us to be separated. We can move together. And those of you that want to rock with us, we're going to keep moving. With that being said, I cannot share the podcast because I did so much advertising. Facebook suspended me. So I can't share a link. So if you can get your phone and share the podcast. Today we're going to talk about the cost of death. Was having the conversation and wanted it to be known what we're losing, the cost of death, right? What does death look like? Because oftentimes we like to chime in on death in the black community and these other communities, right? White people sit back and go, hey, you guys shoot and kill each other, and they forget that they're number one in all the categories, right? And black people sit back and go, hey, but you all too, and then they're number one in the number two categories, right? But who's paying the price? Well, we're kind of going to get into that. right? And it's an important piece that we have this conversation because as I was sharing the other night on the podcast, and that podcast will be released tonight, was a powerful interview that they're, you know, how your man was saying, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, right? They're eating off our children. They're eating the boys. They're eating the girls. And we're paying for their college degrees and education. And we're paying for their businesses and their lives and their existence. And we do it all in the name of what people say it's a purpose, it's a job. When you get into black boys in the morgue, black children in the morgue not being picked up by their families, right? And they're cremating these children. So who's ever paying for that? They're eating off these children. When we talk about foster care, and they hold a black child 18 months longer, right? Then they infiltrate arbitrarily, as we learn, arbitrarily to say that you have to have a certain standard in your house when raising a child, which goes against the Constitution. But we go in here and we say you got to have this. And if you go for it or you don't have legal representation, arbitrarily they're able to take those kids. Then when they get the kids into foster care, they don't offer them the same services as they offer white kids. So they've been eating off your children. They're helping create. Now, understand what I'm talking about when I say this. We too are helping create the criminal. Right? It's not just a one-off thing. We too are participating in helping create the criminal. The child has died. The child has killed. Our children out here devastated, broken, fatherless, homeless, right? We too are killing the children. Now, I say this in regards to not knowing that people not knowing the value, right? When we talk about the value of a father and the value of a boy and the value of our women and children, right? I say that in order because we do not speak in order. We continue to forget that it's father, mother, children. So in our relationships, we even have gone as far as say, even in our relationships, we put the children before the father or your spouse. And when you do those things, you teach the children the disorder, the problems, the breakups, the emotion. So when I say without fatherhood, we're feeding the system, we can go down a number of things. But they're eating off of the children. And our participation must stop. Every child, but I'm going to talk about the black ones, every child deserves both their parents. The child needs to know the father. The child needs to have these things in place. Because when there is, you know, this, you got to tell me, Dave, where's the data when the mother's not around and where the child goes? I need you to tell me where that data is. What is it linked to? What happens to a child if they don't have a mother?
Well, we know the statistics say they're more likely not to finish school, more likely to go to jail, more likely to die sooner than most. I mean, the list just goes on.
That's without a father.
That's without a father.
I'm looking for the statistics without the mother.
Oh, I'm not aware of that.
There are none. You can Google, Boogle, however you want to make it look like. Mm-hmm. Mothers are very important. Mothers are very, very important. Fathers are very, very important. This is why we say kids need both parents. But to get to how they're eating off our children, right? It's a little thing in place, right? We're talking CVI work. We've been doing CVI work before CVI work was even there, because we have prevented a number of thousands of children from going into the system. So we've been doing CVI work, right? So when you get into the dynamic of the single household, there's always a pushback, because that's where a lot of people come from. So they're very emotional about their experience, and I get it. But we cannot say that we want to change where we're going, what we're going to do, how we want to be better, right, if we don't take the steps to be better. 38%, right? 38% of the culture is married. So that other 68, 62%, right? Where are they, right? We still have more boys in this country than girls, except for our culture, which means disorder, right? In my opinion. Now, we can debate, we can go through that whole process.
No,
but I mean,
debate.
Okay. So what I mean about eating off the children, if you got 100 black, now watch how I'm gonna set this up. If you got 100 black kids on a waiting list to learn to read, you launch a campaign in December to raise the money to help teach those 100 black boys sitting on the waiting list. We had some tremendous outcomes. And let's be clear. Shout out to Skillman Foundation for coming through again for us, helping us on this Reading is Life campaign. So we got 100 boys, and we share this dynamic. Oh, okay. Right? And so when we put out, it was 100 boys. Since December, we basically only raised 7,200. Right? Since December. So again, how do you convince me? Because if I'm a little boy and I walk into these environments as little boys do, this is why they're retreating. Because they can tell you don't care about them. They can tell inside of the home that we don't care about them. So when care shows up, that's how they end up getting molested. That's how they end up getting kidnapped. That's how they end up getting raped. That's how they end up going into gangs and things, because they go where they may be cared for. So the numbers, I'm sure, Heather, you want to intervene here, because I'm on my thing right now.
Right.
But the process, right, Dave? The process is we have a solution, painting the solution, and yet very little investment.
So let's frame this conversation so our audience can kind of follow. We're going to frame it just by kind of helping you to understand where we're coming from with the cost of death. So Calvin kind of alluded to one lane of how the cost of death is impacting our children, boys and specifically. So when we're talking about the cost of death, there is a short-term, intermediate term, and a long-term impact of when we talk about the cost of death. We're talking about the cost of death of our children, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and give you some insights to that. We're talking about the death of traditions. We're talking about the death of values. We're talking about the death of leadership. We're talking about the death of the family structure. We're talking about the death of love versus hate. Like, we're talking about the long-term cost of death. and all of these areas, how it is impacting our community, how it is impacting our mindset, our values, what's important to us, what can we set to the side, what is urgent, what can wait till later. And so where Calvin is coming from, we know that people care about each other. We know that. What we're talking about is where is the urgency for action based on how you care. And when you don't take action, like if you had an infection, right, and you didn't take care of the infection, there is a process that your body is going to go through to try to fight it off for a while, and then it can succumb to that infection, and therefore leading it to the death of something. It from the taking away of, the elimination of. And so what we're talking about and how we're framing this conversation is to get our listeners and our viewers to think a little bit deeper than the surface, to see some things that we may see from our point of view. And our point of view is based on our research, is based on our activity, is based on how we interact with people. It is based on real life application. So when Calvin is talking about boys in the morgue, this is because this is the inquiry. This is because this is where we have gone to find out for ourselves, not just to see what other people are saying, but to see for ourselves, because we have to understand what's at stake. And so while you hear Calvin talk about this so passionately, and Dave talk about this so passionately, because they're right there on the front lines, because they're having these experiences, because they're having these conversations, because they're seeing families, and they're seeing men, and they're seeing boys, and they're seeing husbands and fathers, and they're seeing mothers. And that's what we do together. Collectively, we work with the family. We know that the restoration of family is the solution to our community issues. The solution for our family issues is to make sure that we are raising healthy boys, so that those boys then take on the responsibility of manhood, being husbands and fathers, so that there is some order, some structure to what's happening in our households. And because of the death of that, and you know that we've talked about how certain legislation has set some things in motion, there was some impact to it short term. And then now we're looking at the long-term cost of the death of policies, of the death of communities, of the death of the war on, whatever that war might be. We're seeing the long-term impact and effect of that now. So it's important that as we have this conversation today, that you look at your contributions, your impact on an immediate basis, on an intermediate basis, and then on a long-term basis. And when we're talking about that, so we look at our program and our boys in 10-year increments. If you come into our program and you're 8 years old, we have 10 years between your 8 and 18. From that point, what has been seeded in you from 8 to 18, that means you're 28. That means you're 38. These are long-term impacts of what's seeded in an 8-year-old. And in our Reading is Life program, why that's so important is because we're talking about 3 to 7-year-olds. So that 3-year-old in 10 years is 13. And 10 years from that, he's 23. And so we have to seed in the lives of them at this age so that they have that seeding over time, because that's the intermediate impact of the decision that he's going to make as a 13-year-old. Whether he's going to pursue education or is that dream going to die? If he's going to pursue his gifts, his talents, his ability, is he going to be a family-oriented person? All of that is seeded at 3. That's where it begins. And so that intermediate effect is, where is he in the community? Because when you're 13, you're starting to have impact, not just on your family, but other families, other people, in other areas where you travel. And then 10 years from that, you are making a contribution to the community and the family, whether that's going to be a positive or that's going to be not positive for the community. And so we have to start to think that what we do immediately has an intermediate impact, but it also has a long-term impact on economy, on culture, on what we're seeing now. So some of the things that we're seeing now, they're not new. These are things that have been seeded in people over time. So 10 years ago, right, when you look at this country's leadership, there were already seeds planted there. This is not new information. So the people who made the decisions hoping that it would be different, this is the intermediate effect. There's still a long-term effect to what's going to happen based on what happens today. Where do you stand? Where do you stand? And so I'm going to let Calvin and Dave kind of have a message before I start with my my death scenario here.
Well, I've said more than enough. So, Dave, let me see your phone.
Yeah, when you sit down and think about short-term gratification and long-term effects, it's unfortunate that we don't begin in the earlier years of the child to prepare them for long-term benefits. It's like investing in stock or investing in crypto, whatever the case may be. You have to start somewhere small, and then you begin to build upon it brick by brick. Unfortunately, that's not usually how our children come out the gate. And since usually most of the time when you see government officials do their planning, they're planning 20, 25 years out.
Yes.
A business is usually asked you to give the perspectives. That's usually 5, 10, 15 years out. And in the process, they're looking for what's going to be the long-term benefits. Yeah, in the immediate part of it, you think, okay, this is great, everything's good, I'm getting immediate gratification. But what happens when all the waves start to come in, when the storms come in, when the issues come in? And that's usually what happens with our kids. Usually people get together, they have children, and they haven't planned out that 5, 10, 15-year plan. And so what ends up happening is that kids get lost in the sauce. They get lost in translation, and the communication starts to break down. Once the communication breaks down, then we have all these major issues that we see with our kids today. Kids can't read. Kids can't communicate. Kids can't interact. Kids don't even know their neighbors. I mean, you start seeing the division manifest because there was no foundational plan set. So when you talk about the death of something, it's usually because along the way there's always been seeds that are planted that was already perpetuating the problem and not working on the solution. So it's so important that, you know, when you start talking about our children, that we prepare them right out the gate. The personality is usually formulated at the age of 5 years old. Then you start building on this personality. If you don't teach your children the most important, vital things, that I always keep coming back to the same thing, from the inside out, then usually the outside factors are going to control their internal stability. This is when you see all this radical behavior. And most of it is driven by unbalanced emotion. Now your children are not healthy because internally they're all confused and don't have a real working process that allows them to really be able to evolve. So as Calvin said earlier, now you see they don't get the emotional support. They don't get the foundations of morals and values and ethics and standards that lays a stronger foundation to build on. Then usually when someone comes along and say, hey, I can help you. This is what happened with our gangs. A great deal of the kids that are in gangs are usually because they want to be a part of something. They want to be a part of a community. They want to be a part of a family. And even if the family is distorted, it still gives them the impression that they're a part of something. Well, if in your own household is divided and you have no structure there, then they're going to be more prone to go to these outside sources. And that's where you start seeing the death of our community, the death of our children, and not become successful. You can go to some of the Asian population, and they start very early. Jewish population, they start very early. There is a structural foundation they build upon, and it's usually based on tradition. Now, they may waver here and there, you know, because everything has to be edited. But long term, the objectives they have long term are still the same. It's built on a foundation. And our foundation, the African American community, and this is not everyone, so sometimes people say, oh, you say African American, you're collecting us all in one group. No, we're talking about the big picture. We see the statistics changing. We're seeing that, if the gentleman said by 2050 or whatever the case may be, we're talking the divorce will be in the teens. Well, that means that if you got 18%, that's a sad thing to see, because now the higher population of our black community is not married. That means we have division across the board, and a house divided will not stand.
Yeah.
Right.
Your show. Let's go.
All right. So, in my research, I started to ask the question, what is the cost of death of a child? And so just financially, economically, it's about between $10,000 and $20,000 when a child dies. But that is the monetary cost, right? That is the immediate. Let's just say that's the immediate cost. But the intermediate cost is mental and emotional. And part of that shows up in these ways. So it shows up as intense and persistent grief. And this is from the nucleus. So this is from the parents. This is from the siblings. This is the grandparents. This is the aunts, the uncles, the godparents. This is an event that impacts everyone. And so it has that ripple effect and ripples outward. Intense and persistent grief, complicated grief, anger and resentment, guilt and self-blame, anxiety and fear, depression and withdrawal, disturbed sleep patterns, and physical symptoms. Now, this is just the people who may be immediately impacted. That is a level of trauma, and even depending on how that child died, the fact that a child dies is already traumatic. But how that children are dying. And that's just one of the reasons why we initiated the Smash Suicide campaign. Because in our research, again, we started to see this pattern that boys, black or white boys, but black boys are number one by 1% mark. 1%. Black boys, number one, dying by suicide at age 5. Now, I think a boy at age 5 is playing with Legos and talking trucks. Like, that's my idea of a 5-year-old from 5 to 11, right? They have made a decision through this suicidal ideation that they no longer want to be here. What are we doing in our homes and in our communities and in our schools that would convince a 5-year-old up to 11 to take their own life? And they're very intentional about this. We're talking suffocation, hanging, firearms, running into traffic. These are the top ways that these boys are dying. Just incredible. And somehow this got by us in our community that this is something that's happening. Because it's so incredible and so unbelievable, you don't want to believe it. Like, that can't be right. That can't be right. And we agreed. So we went to funeral homes, had conversations with funeral directors who are in tears because they can't understand this phenomenon. Now, you can call it what you want to on the outside for families to keep whatever, appearance of that it's not that intentional act. You can call it what you want. Our boys are dying. Our children are dying. Our families are dying. Our community is dying. But understand that we have and hold the promise. We hold the promise. That means we can choose to do something different. We can choose to be different. We can choose to take action. And there are a multitude of people taking action. What we need to make sure that we're doing is that we're lining up with them. So when we talk about our community pancake breakfast, for example, this is a way to align. This is a way to meet people who are already actively engaged in the work. In whatever way that you have been called to this work, now you need to align and have allies that understand the work, because everybody has been called to this work. Now, whatever that path is, we need you to find that path, because you need to be aligned with whatever the cause or the path that you have, because we have an opportunity to change our trajectory. So that cost now is our investment. It's the return on what we invest. It is the promise that we have. And so I want to talk a little bit more, because I really want people to understand that inaction is almost as devastating as the cause of the death. So when we start looking as a as a culture, we start looking as a society. I also found that the cost of death for children who have just been exposed to trauma is $458 billion a year. Let me say that again. For children who have been exposed to trauma and violence, the cost to us as a society is $458 billion a year. And that equates somewhere around to, I think it was like $3,300 a person. So do we invest in help? Do we invest in treatment? Do we make another level of investment? Because when we don't, this bill, now we talked about immediate, right? What happens right now, or what happens immediately after. Then we talked about intermediate, right? And then we talked about long-term effects. So just in the number of years that you plan to live, or that you plan to see your children move in that 10-year increment, that's $458 billion a year times the 10 years that your child is on this planet. That's a lot of resources. And one of the issues that they talk about and complain about is that not enough people are utilizing the resources to intervene in the trauma. So in our program, in our mentoring program, and in our organization, we work in intervention and we work in prevention. So there has to be somebody that's standing there at the doorway saying, not this way, this way. Prevention. Not here, not this way. You don't have to make this choice. That's prevention. We're preventing things from happening. Intervention is, this is what's happened and this is what we're going to do about it. This is where we're going to put an end to this. This is where we're going to put our energy. This is our call to action, is intervention. And so we're a part of several different initiatives. One of those initiatives is the community violence intervention. And we're a partner with Force Detroit to make sure that that community violence initiative and the coalition of organizations and people who are structured around this issue are making an impact. So whatever your call is for that, you still need to be in the purpose of your calling. Because if we're going to change it, it has to be because we have decided to do something about it. Because the lack of that is the cost of death. You had something you want to add?
So the numbers that you are sharing, right? So you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars
a year. Mm-hmm.
So we don't want everybody to understand that's not just our culture. That's across the country.
That's societal, yes.
Societal across the country. That's every denomination, nationality is involved in that. We don't want you to think, right, that this is all coming from us. It's impossible, right? Just like we don't want you to all think that all the crime is coming from us. But the point we're making is the cost, right? And this next point that I'm going to make, you'll understand what I mean. When a male is killed, a boy, a man, a husband or a father, prior to ever having a family, you killed a nation.
Absolutely.
You literally have killed a nation. Where we've made it so comfortable of shooting and killing and not supporting and caring and working with one another, the males are now, right? Who pays the price of an unkept male? The women, the mothers, the businesses, the stores, the community. When you kill a boy, you kill off invention, innovation, leadership, family, the next whatever. The boy is the seed carrier. This is why he was always watched, abused, beat, denied, hung, raped, we put these things on the boy. So when we're talking about the cause of death, it is not necessarily that he has to be deceased to be dead. See? Right? There's a thing, we used to say back in the day, somebody walking, it was from a show, dead man walking, right? So you see that because there's not a lot of input, right? In Michigan, 48th in reading, literacy. Now, how that impacts is we're 48 across the state, not just one, but that's everybody in Michigan contributes to that 48th position. It is not just a color thing. Everybody contributes to us being in the 48th position. But it is amazing how we believe that we're always in need of someone having to rescue us because of the tragic Negro syndrome that you see constantly played out in movies, homes, jobs, positions. You're seeing it right now from government, the whole nine, right? And where we bear some of the burden is our investment in alcohol, drugs, dope. We should never, ever be relaxed as a culture in our contributions thinking that we get to live like everybody else. That should never be the case for our culture in this United States. But when we deny the fact, right, our boys, we deny the fact that a family doesn't need a father, when we deny these facts, we create more of that trauma. So our contribution is present in these areas, right? And it's just different for us to take in some of these things because we've taken in the separation, the individual. We've taken these things in. So here's a couple of points that we're going to make to you in the second half, right, about things that you can do, right, because all these children deserve the same shot. Line them up, put them in the same position, give them the same things, make sure they got the same tools, give them the same start, because we've already proven our contributions to this country is off the charts. So what we're not going to do is continue down this road because we have the outcomes. I was sharing with the guys at the meeting today, man, how were you able to accomplish all of this, right? And I had a conversation today. I'm not alone. And I think a lot of people just, because they see your face, they think you're alone. I'm not doing this work by myself, Dave. Like, we know that. Mm-hmm. So we've not gotten here to this point 18 years all alone, right? But the negative nature that we have in this work is we're competitive over 10% of philanthropic dollars. Instead of us working together, you give them a bag, they get a bag, now they want to shine, right? But in the process, there's only so much you can do. We've walked into a number of places, right? And it's all top heavy. And they're working with the children. And they got a budget. And across the board, they got big, demonstrative budgets. We're feeding their families, right? Their families are eating off of benefiting. I say eating, you say benefiting, right? Right? Because they get to go home at night and say those people, right? That's not just one type of people. That's everybody that's working in this work has a tendency. We've been in areas where we heard them N-words, right? So I'm telling you from firsthand, I didn't come to participate in this work to be part of those things. We came to do the work. We've been doing the work, and we're looking for our contribution, our part, because we don't have just a local vision. We have a national vision for this work because our outcomes are second to none. And I'll stand by that. But my other point to this is I'm not alone, and we would never have gotten this far alone. And so when you look into the community, a lot of times people feel like they're alone. And so they look and they say, well, my family doesn't contribute. My cousins doesn't contribute. Oh, every time I need something, I can't count on them. That's because the mindset is only set in an area for you to understand you can go anywhere with this work. Everybody's suffering. White males, Hispanic males, Middle Eastern males, everybody, all these boys is suffering. So you can go other places with this work. We like to look into the city because looking into the city where the problems, we see the denial and we see the great fruitfulness of denied access. Where you can go into a bank, but you can't get the bank, but I got the same paperwork as anybody else. Well, we really just don't. We're still seeing that. Well, you're talking about this. Well, we're still seeing that, right? And so when we talk about moving the community into unity and we're talking about families, here's two things I'm going to give to this conversation because I think it's important that we establish this order right away. And I'm working on this pamphlet that I'm going to hand out, 10 ways to raise your family better, right? Here's the very first thing. In a home where there are two parents, we have to establish hierarchy and value the father. That's order. The father then must turn around and value the mother. That's order. Then the parents are supposed to turn around and value the children. We are supposed to be on the same page in order to raise the child to be a successful male and show and female and show them the example of love by the mother and the father communicating. We work from trauma-filled areas where it's my mama. And so we come into relationships not understanding how to be a co-pilot to a pilot and not understanding how the pilot must have a skill set that we could co-pilot with, or else you shouldn't sit in the seat. But if the men don't raise the boys, it's going to be hard to get pilots. So we got to go through so many things. So he's behind. The boy comes out, we line him up. He's kicked out of daycare. 3. Okay, so once I kick him out of the daycare, that knocked him out of the line of competition. We didn't prepare him, right? The negative talk that we do with our boys. Oh, he's wild. Oh, he's bad. That's because you don't know how to handle a boy. You're not even supposed to be raising him. Oh, he's so bad. We get him. This kid is unbelievable. But we also recognize that you don't have the skill set to be raising him. So you bring him to us, we do our job, and then we hand him back. What we can't hand him back in is the same environment. So 1, honor thy mother and thy father, husband and wife. That's where you start. That's the number 1 rule to setting a standard. Stop having kids out of wedlock. Stop thinking abortion is a contraceptive. It is not. But practice and understanding why it's better to raise your children together. The in-house father is the most important piece. And when you put money over any human being, money has become your God. Money is a resource. It should not dictate how I treat you and how you treat me. So the second thing I'm going to give you, literacy. Reading is life. When the child falls out the womb, you should have already started reading while the child was in the womb. but the child is supposed to get a considerable amount of words. The number 2 thing you must do in your household is establish a library. There should be a reading library consistently in your home, and it should be a consistent time in your home where everybody is focused on literacy. Why? Your relationships is connected to literacy. How I treat the next person is connected to literacy. How I make money is connected to literacy. How I view money is connected to literacy. How I breathe is connected to literacy. When I go to the hospital is connected to literacy. If I have an ailment, is connected to literacy. Reading is life, and you need to understand that that is an important ingredient. Stop putting children on video games and put them practical books, reading, understanding how important that is. Those are the 2 things to start a family, and understanding that the communication must be there. Set a standard with your family. Heather?
I agree. I agree absolutely, and I'm glad that we're having the conversation and working through, because I know when people hear the statistics and it seems so gloomy, what I want you to know that the sun is always shining, regardless of what the sky looks like, regardless of what the circumstance looks like. The sun is always shining, and so because of that, that's a sign for us that there is promise. There is promise outside of the cloudy days, outside of the rain and the snow and people feeling isolated. There is still, the sun is still shining. And so what that means...
Before you go there, because we're on the clock.
Oh.
Because I know you're about to dive back in there. Let me throw that interception in there real quick. Dave, what do you have to add to that?
Well, as both of you have been talking, I've been thinking that a good part of this is image. You know, what type of image are you setting up? From the beginning, we know that we are created in God's image and likeness. But if you're not taught that you have value, you have purpose, you have meaning coming out the gate, then your images are going to be created by subliminal messages that we see all the time. When you think about the 70s, for example, the black exploitation movies, they began to create images of men who were hustlers, players, pimps, all the negatives. So that image became glorified. That image became something people wanted to do. Then you started seeing through the movies like Claudine or what have you, where the father was taken out the home, he had no value. So you create images. The more images you create that are negative, the more they become a part of your mindset. So when we began to help the young people, as you said, there's an image, even when you talk about getting a relationship and having being married, if you will. What image do you have as a marriage and how it's supposed to work? What image do you have on how to be a parent? See, in most cases, what I've found through my own research, through my own studies, and all the people I've counseled, most people have 2 different images when they get in a relationship. So when they come in that relationship, their communication is broken because the terminologies are not the same. Their ability to relate and identify for an intimate relationship is not the same. So you talk about a child should be made in love. Most people don't even have a clear definition of love. I asked one of my clients one time, she said she wasn't pretty. I said, define pretty. The simplest word you would think she could break down, and she couldn't because she didn't have the kind of image that could clearly give her a meaning to what that word was. So until we learn how to, they're starting from the gate. If we get in a relationship, as soon as we get in a relationship, dating, we should start creating that image we want to see. We should start communicating about what does these terms mean to you. What does love mean? We talk about having children out of love. What does that mean? Because in the moment, people, when they engage in the physical activity, they telling each other they love each other. But what does that mean? So then you have a child, and when you have this child, now this child's coming out of wedlock because, again, y'all thought you were in love, but you had no clear meaning. And that love didn't spill over to let's get married. So now you got a woman in a single household with 5 kids, and she got 4 boys. What kind of image can she create? Because all the men that she met created this false image, oh, he my man, and he wasn't a man. So it's so many things that we have to consider when we talk about the cost of death. We talk about the cost of death from the fact that we don't even have a clear image of who we are and who we should be. So image is everything. What do you see? That's all I like to say. What does it look like? You can go in the average household and sit down with 2 people who are married and say, tell me your story and what does a marriage look like? and they'll give you different versions from the time beginning to when if they're fortunate enough to be married for 50 years, was 18,250 days. How did you create the image that now your children, as I went to this homegoing today, 97 years old, her husband transitioned, but she got 50 kids, and these kids are moving to be successful because she created an image. So image is so important in going into a relationship. What does it look like? You don't make a movie unless you got an image of what you want it to be like. And the characters and the directors and the producers can't produce that movie unless they have an image already set. We don't go in relationship like that. So you're already doomed to fail.
Dive in. You got 4 minutes.
And you're going to bring me back. Okay. Well, thank you, Dave. I was feeling that when you were sharing that too. Where is the beginning? Where's the beginning? I encourage you to start today. If something that we said triggered you, that is where you should be working. If it triggered you to say that's not me, and that means you need to work in that space. So we have to recognize what the triggers are triggering. So if it was anything that we said today that pricked you, interested you, resonated with you, these are the spaces that we need to begin. So you don't think you have to start, anywhere random. It is what impacts you right now. And just keep in mind that the choices and the decisions that you make, one of the reasons why it has longevity to it, why it can go the long term, and why it can penetrate generations is because one of the ways that God created us, and Calvin mentioned this too, that God created us in generations. Our legacy is in our generations. And so what we do now is imprinted on our DNA to hold that memory throughout that time. So where we intervene, where we change, this is how we change. We don't all of a sudden have all these educated people. We were standing on the shoulders of those who went before us. That means that seed was planted in that immediate space, and then it had that intermediate space, and then it ended up being the long-term space. It wasn't that it just happened simultaneously. It happened because there was investment. There were people changing their minds. There were people planting those seeds. There were people who said, not this way, this way. That is how we got to where we are. And so it's really important that as I talk about and as we share with you all of these different ways that people can be triggered and all of these different ways that people can respond, that you got to respond. Because even the responding to it is imprinted on your DNA. Your decision to change and be different and invest this way and do these things and follow my purpose and help my neighbor, all of those things are imprinted on your DNA. That means that code goes to your children and your children's children. What do you want that code, that legacy to represent? That's where you make your investment. That's where you start. If you don't like the way that your child or and it could be a grown adult, if you don't like the way that they're responding, then you need to change how you're responding.
Tell them where they can get you at. I love your passion. Go ahead, baby. Tell them where they can get you at.
You can reach me at yourinspiredjourney.com. That's yourinspiredjourney.com. You can reach me by phone at 313-759-7855.
Brother Dave?
Or you can reach me at David Patterson, FMAM, for me and about me on Facebook, and DROM7, DROME7 at yahoo.com.
So you can reach me at calvintman.com, right? And you can follow us on Instagram at EMIYTV_podcast, right? Understand that, yes, I talk about boys. Yes, I talk about men. Yes, I talk about husbands. And yes, I talk about fathers. And the real reason why is because who's going to protect? Who's going to marry? Who's going to live? Who's going to bring? Who's going to... If we don't shape the males, this country has not invested in males in years. And as you're watching what's taking place, it's almost like kid-like. I got the keys, and I'm going to make everybody's life miserable, regardless to if I'm a slob, snob, racist, whatever the case may be. I'm making it happen, right? I'm hiring men. I'm firing everybody, right? You didn't invest in us, so we're going to give you all of this stuff, right? We see it everywhere. We're seeing it to the point that we must understand that the cost of death comes Scripture. Proverbs 13 and 17 says, if you take something negative and make it positive, it'll never leave your house. You cannot practice mischievousness in your house. You will cause that house to burn. Kids need both parents, y'all. Regardless to how we feel about the man or the woman, kids need both of their parents. And I share this statistic all the time, and I'm going to share it with you because it's important. And it's the last reason why I say we've been killing our children without fathers. When a child has a father from birth to 9, the child lives longer. Peace.